I think it's under Tools, Options, and then there's like the sounds.
Okay, let me see if I can find that. Tools, Options.
Are you on a Mac or a PC?
Mac.
Oh, okay. Might not be the same.
I was gonna say,
it will probably then be on
Preference?
the preferences.
All right, so I see then audio.
Yeah.
Notifications, play sounds.
Yes, turn that off. Turn that off.
Yeah.
All right, that was the only thing that was on.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Simply Radio. Today we have Ed Pagan as our guest, and Phil Clark and Pia are on the panel. And we're going to be talking a lot about Latin horror because Ed is a Latin horror expert. And he also does camera work, and he is also a curator for festivals. And so, without much further ado, I'll let Ed introduce himself.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on. Well, my name is Edwin Pagan, and I'm a working cinematographer and filmmaker. And for the last 8 years, I've been also curating panels for festivals. One of them is the New York International Latino Film Festival, based here in New York. And also, I've been doing a Latino screening series at the Anthology Film Archives for about 8 years, actually now going on 9. And I've been curating initially what's called the New Latino Filmmaker Series, which I've done for 8 years. And then about 2 years ago, I started adding a new series, which I call the Horror Files, which is a horror component, which is mainly composed of screening films by Latinos and Latinas that are working within the genre of horror.
We could find out a lot about this on your blog, which is the Latin Horror blog, yes?
That is correct. It's
yes.
LatinHorror.com. And actually, if you go to the page and you go to the upper right-hand corner, you see there's a couple of icons there that also take you to our social networking platforms, whether it's MySpace, Twitter, Facebook, etc. So you'll be able to find what we're doing on a broad, on many levels.
While I was researching you, I noticed that you had a lot of experience, a lot of information about Mexican horror. And then I looked up Mexican horror because I know there are a lot of Mexican horror films, especially from many years ago. And I decided that I was pretty much going to take a look at some of it. What would you recommend?
Well, one of the films that that you have to go back to is what's called The Weeping Woman, La Llorona, which is actually one of the classics that actually started the Mexican experience with doing horror. And it's actually ingrained in the culture, too, because it comes from the folklore, both in Mexico and abroad, where the parents, in order to keep their children in line, would say that if they didn't behave, La Llorona, which is the weeping woman, would come and haunt them. And it's based on the folklore, particularly in Mexico, where a woman ended up drowning her children. It's kind of a horrific story. But what happened was the spirit remained behind, and because, of course, she regretted what happened in hindsight, she would occasionally come back to the river and through the towns and basically, haunt the town, and people would hear her wailing, which was always a lead into the fact that she would appear.
Okay, when did that movie come out?
I think that was 1934, if I remember correctly.
Wow, okay. And anything else other than that?
Well, that's one of the major ones. I think one of the interesting things that I like to tell people is that, because I think it's an easy marker to understand, it's like Bela Lugosi's Dracula. And one of the little things that people don't realize is that there's also a Spanish version of Dracula, which was directed by George Melford. Shot at the same time as Dracula, the Todd Browning piece, the one that we all know with Bela Lugosi in it. But the film was shot actually in the evening. So what would happen is that during the American crew would have the sets and they would shoot their scenes. And then at nighttime, the Mexican crew, the Spanish crew would come in and shoot their scenes. So they would use the same set, same script, same shooting schedule, replicating the film. So, and in many cases, a lot of people that know the film well will say that it's a little bit more of a dynamic film because whereas in the American version, everything is shot pretty classic, very straight on camera, very little movement of camera, people either walk in and out of frame, whereas in the Mexican version, you actually have cameras that are dollying in, or craning up. So it's a pretty dynamic film. Of course, what happens in American culture is that because the version that we've come to love with Bela Lugosi is the one that got ingrained, is the one that we remember. But you can find actually, for the 75th anniversary, the film was put out as a DVD collection, and they actually bookended both films on the DVD. So it's a nice edition to pick up and kind of like compare both films, which are both pretty stunning actually.
And was that film called The Vampire?
No, it's actually called Dracula. It has an accent on the A.
Oh, okay.
But it's the same title.
All right, and beyond that, you must be quite interested in the Latin horror revolution that's going on today with directors like Benicio del Toro, and can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, and actually I think who you're referring to is Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Benicio del Toro is the actor who just played the Wolfman. Guillermo del Toro is the director that has directed The Devil's Backbone, the Hellboy franchise.
I'm in Australia. I'm far away from Mexico.
But yeah, he's actually, and just truth be told, he's actually one of the reasons that I began Latin horror. Because after I saw a couple of his early films, like The Devil's Backbone, etc., and then I got to see Pan's Labyrinth, which I enjoyed immensely. When I started thinking about,
that was a great movie.
Oh, it was an amazing film.
I can't believe that stupid other movie. I can't remember it. The one with the little girl going into this beauty thingy or whatever. I can't believe that one beat out Pan's Labyrinth. I was astounded by that.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens. Yeah. Well, I think what happens also is that other films got more play because they were a little bit more commercially viable, and Pan's Labyrinth did really well because people loved it as a really good movie and a good story done by a master storyteller. But the other film had a lot going for it in the sense that it had a big studio behind it, pushing it and lobbying, etc. So it got a lot of attention. The people that will kind of endorse Pan's Labyrinth are your cinephiles, people that really understand film and can really appreciate it for the gem that it was.
Well, I loved it. I read the script and watched the movies several times, and I rarely watch movies several times unless I really, really, really like them.
Ed, could you tell if there's if you're watching Latino horror, are there any indicators to say what countries they come? Are there any differences between Mexican horror and, say, Chilean horror? And
there are various idiosyncrasies, but one of the things that I would point out is that I think whether it's Spain, Mexico, and Latin America, one of the things that stands out among them is the fact that our stories are more grounded in character development and storytelling versus plot. So, for instance, if you're going to define on another level the difference between American horror and Latin horror, the best example that I've heard, and I use to this day now because I think it's a good one, is Guillermo del Toro during an interview pointed out that in American horror, the movies attempt to destroy the physical, the body, what can be hurt or harmed, whereas in Spanish horror, whether it's Latin American or from Europe and Spain, is more about destroying the psyche, the soul, the mind. So whereas one is more involved about destroying the body, as you can tell in what's come to be known as horror porn, where everything is about chopping up the body or mutilating women. Spanish horror, Latin horror, is more about the suspense, more about what's hiding in the dark. It's more about the psychology of fear. And I think that's a very profound distinction. And I think, and in that regard, Latin horror is a little more elegant these days. I think that American horror in the 50s and 60s was exactly like that. You had those wonderful black and white films from the 50s and 60s that, although a little campy in the way that they were produced, were elegant films in the fact that they really spoke to you as an audience on another level. Intelligent.
The way you just explained right now about Latin Spanish horror, doesn't that also go the same for other countries?
Oh, absolutely.
I watch a lot of Swedish and Scandinavian stuff, and I would say what you just said, I would say that would go for those countries too.
Oh, absolutely. But that's in terms of horror, that's also a new emergence. And I'll point out, for instance, in Japanese horror, which is very much in line with Latin horror, because in both cultures we believe in the fact that maybe the afterlife exists, that their ghost exists. So, whereas in an American movie, we are fighting from the very beginning that such a thing exists, whereas we're running away from something that's out to kill us. In Latin American culture and in Japanese culture, we believe in ghosts, the afterlife, spirits. So from the very first frame, we believe that something is out there to get us. We believe that it exists. The question is, what does it want to do to us and why? So we're more concerned with finding out what this is about and how we can alter the outcome versus, being chased down the dark woods with an axe and being chopped to pieces. But you're quite right. I mean, movies like Let Me In, the remake, which is now coming out, which was based on a European film, which was fantastic. I don't know that there was a reason to remake it, but those type of films are also within the same vein, more about character development, about structure, about storytelling in an old-fashioned kind of way, which is both more elegant but also more captivating and engaging.
Okay, so what do you look for in a horror film? Say a script came across your desk and you were looking at it and you had to decide whether this would be a good horror film on film. What would you be looking for in the script?
Well, I think it's no different than looking at any other movie I would want to produce, except that I'm looking within that for the conventions that people would want in horror. But I'm looking more these days for films that would round out to be Latin horror or equate to Japanese horror or European films, which again is looking for storytelling. Does the story compel me to read further? Am I engaged by the fact of what's going to happen to our protagonist, And is the antagonist, whether it's a spirit or whether it's someone in the woods with an axe, engage me enough that I find them both, intriguing and repulsive at the same time. Are there any new tricks in the bag of tricks that haven't been used yet? Or are they being used in a different way? So, for instance, in many movies, a lot of times what they'll use is little gags, whereas in the moment when you least expect it, or it's the most quiet, or after a long conversation, a cat will jump out of the shadows, and they would ramp that up to the number 10 on the volume, and call it a scare. But to me, that doesn't quite do it. I'd rather read in the script that there is some presence in the room where the protagonist doesn't know yet that it's in the room, but we're clued in on it already. So we know that there's either some pending danger or some contact about to be made, and we know about it beforehand, more or less in the way that Hitchcock many times led the audience in on the joke or the fright long before the person who was about to be frightened knew about it. So I look for those kind of things that I find engaging, that want me to turn the page past page 10. I always look how the story's set up. By the 10th page has the writer, has the screenwriter laid out the story in a way that I can already see where it's going in terms of a script, because as we both know, in your line of work, you have to lay out your story, and it's a blueprint for the rest of the film. So the blueprint, which is the script, is for people to work off. So it has to be laid out in a way that makes sense and that you can envision what it is you want to do with the piece.